40 men lined the boardwalk of Fort Worth that morning. Not a single one spoke. In the center of the square, a young woman stood tied to a hitching post, a thin white veil draped over her face. Her hands were bound so tight the rope had rubbed her wrists raw. Curtis Harlan, they called him Chief, held the other end of the rope and laughed. Then a rifle shot cracked the air. The rope snapped. The woman stumbled back. That was the exact moment the stranger changed everything. Hit subscribe if you want to see what happens. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you right now? To know how we got here, we need to go back. Back to where it started. Back to before it went wrong. The whole ugly thing began 3 days earlier. Fort Worth was already half dead by noon. The summer heat pressed down on the wide dirt street like a heavy hand. Dust coated every window. The saloon doors hung open, motionless. Nobody was drinking. Nobody was talking. They were all watching the same thing. Curtis Harlan and his gang had taken over the town 6 months before. They didn't ride in with guns blazing. They just showed up at the land office one day, shoved the clerk against the wall, and announced a new management. The sheriff left town that same night. The judge fell in line by the end of the week. After that, Harlan's word was law. He called himself Chief, and his 7 men enforced the title with a casual cruelty that made grown men cross the street when they saw them coming. They collected a tax on every business. They ate for free at the restaurant. They took whatever they wanted from the general store. And if anyone objected, that person disappeared. The townspeople learned to look at their boots and stay quiet. It was safer that way. Then came the wagon train. A small group of settlers passed through the territory 3 days ago. They were headed west, looking for land, carrying everything they owned in 3 covered wagons. Harlan's men met them at the river crossing. What happened next was over in less than an hour. The men were shot, the wagons burned, and a young woman named Clara was pulled from the wreckage. She was maybe 22 years old, light brown hair, thin from hunger, with a quiet terror in her eyes that never left. She had a small scar just above her left collarbone, a childhood mark, old and faded. The kind of detail only someone who knew her well would notice. But nobody in Fort Worth knew her. To them, she was just the unlucky survivor of a massacre. Harlan saw an opportunity. He dragged her into town and announced to everyone within earshot that this was his unwanted daughter. He'd been stuck raising her since her mother died, he said, and now he was tired of the burden. Any man in town could have her for a wife, today, right now, in front of everyone. The ceremony would be performed at noon. If no one stepped forward by sunset, he'd hang her from the old cottonwood tree at the end of Main Street. He was laughing when he said it. The kind of laugh a man makes when he knows no one will stop him. The news spread through Fort Worth like a sickness. Men gathered in small clusters outside the saloon, muttering. Some wanted to help but were too afraid. Others convinced themselves she was probably a criminal anyway. Most just waited to see what would happen. A few of Harlan's men walked among them, rifles cradled in their arms, smiling. They dared anyone to be a hero. Clara was tied to the hitching post in the square at first light. They'd put a white dress on her, an old wedding gown from the mercantile, torn at the hem. The veil was thin and yellowed with age. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring at the ground, her lips cracked and bleeding. One old shopkeeper named Ira muttered to his wife that the girl had an accent. "Not from around here," he whispered. "Sounds like she's from up north. Some valley I ain't ever heard of." His wife shushed him. Talking about her was dangerous. The morning stretched on. The sun climbed higher. The crowd grew larger. Still, nobody moved. 40 men, 50, more, all watching, all silent. That's when the stranger rode in. He came from the south end of town, his dark brown horse moving at a slow walk. He wore a light tan hat, a bright red bandana tied around his neck, and a dark gray vest over a light shirt. A lever-action rifle rested in the scabbard at his saddle. He didn't hurry. He didn't call out. He just reined in at the edge of the crowd and looked. His eyes moved over the scene methodically. The bound woman. The gang members scattered like vultures. Harlan standing on the saloon porch, a cigar in his teeth. The townspeople averting their gaze. The stranger dismounted. He tied his horse to a post and stepped forward. The crowd parted without a word. Harlan saw him and grinned. He pulled the cigar from his mouth and gestured grandly toward Clara. "You," he called out, his voice cutting through the silence. "You look like a man who needs a wife. Here's my daughter. Marry her right now. Or leave." The stranger didn't answer right away. He looked at Clara. For a long moment, their eyes met through that thin veil. She was trembling. Her hands were bleeding. Then he spoke. "All right." The single word landed like a stone in still water. The crowd stirred. Harlan's grin widened. His men exchanged glances, their hands drifting toward their guns. Nobody knew what was about to happen. The word hung in the air. All right. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't a boast. It was just a single calm syllable, spoken by a man who didn't seem to have any fear left in him. Curtis Chief Harlan let out a short bark of a laugh. He stepped down from the saloon porch, his boots thudding on the dusty boards. He was a big man, tall and wide in the shoulders, with a thick neck and hands like slabs of meat. His face was sunburned and pitted, and he wore a stained leather vest over a filthy shirt. The cigar had gone out, but he still held it clamped between his teeth. "Well, well," Harlan said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "We got ourselves a volunteer. What's your name, stranger?" The stranger didn't answer. He stood with his arms at his sides, his eyes not on Harlan, but on the bound woman at the hitching post. Through the thin veil, her head had lifted slightly. She was listening. Harlan's grin flickered. Men who didn't give their names annoyed him, but he recovered fast. He always did. "Doesn't matter," he said, waving a hand. "A groom don't need a name. All he needs is to say the words and take the girl. You're about to be a married man, friend. Best enjoy it." A ripple of nervous laughter came from the gang members scattered along the street. There were 7 of them that morning. The one called Jeb Maddox leaned against the water trough, a shotgun cradled in his arms. Buck Larson sat on the steps of the land office, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. The others were positioned like sentries, each one watching a different section of the crowd. They'd all been with Harlan since the beginning. Back before Fort Worth, they'd worked the mining camps up north, running protection rackets and claim jumping. When the camps dried up, they'd moved south, looking for a town soft enough to squeeze. Fort Worth had been perfect. The local sheriff had been old and tired. The citizens just wanted to live quiet lives. Nobody had been willing to die for a principle. So Harlan and his men had simply taken over. No siege, no gunfight, just a few broken doors and a few broken men. Within a week, the town belonged to them. The shops paid tribute. The bank kept 2 sets of books. The telegraph operator knew which messages to send and which ones to forget. And anyone who dared object found themselves facing a beating in the street, or worse. The townspeople had learned the rules fast. Don't look Harlan in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't gather in groups larger than 3. Don't mention the word marshal. Don't help strangers. And above all, don't interfere with anything Harlan chose to do. Like this, the mock wedding. Harlan had conceived it as entertainment, a way to break the monotony. He'd been holding Clara since the attack on the wagon train 3 days earlier. He could have killed her like the others. He could have kept her for himself. But he'd wanted to make a point. He wanted Fort Worth to watch. He wanted them to participate in their own humiliation by attending the ceremony. The girl herself was nothing to him, a survivor he'd dragged from the wreckage. She had an accent that marked her as not from around here. A soft, rolling way of speaking that one of the shopkeepers had said sounded like she came from up north, from some far-off valley. Harlan didn't care about her past. He just needed her to look pitiful and scared, which she did. "You," Harlan said, pointing at the old preacher who had been forced to stand beside the post. "Get ready to do your part. We're having a wedding." The preacher, a thin man named Elmer, looked sick. His hands were shaking. He'd been dragged from his small church at dawn and told to perform whatever ceremony Harlan demanded. He glanced at the stranger, then at Clara, then back at Harlan. "Mr. Harlan," the preacher began, his voice cracking. "I can't in good conscience." Harlan moved fast. He took 2 steps and backhanded the preacher across the mouth. The old man stumbled back, blood already seeping from his lip. No one in the crowd moved to help him. "I said you'll do your part," Harlan said quietly. "You'll do it now. Or I'll find someone else to replace you, and you won't like what that looks like." The preacher wiped his mouth and nodded. His eyes were wet. Harlan turned back to the crowd. He spread his arms wide like a showman at a carnival. "Let this be a lesson," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the street. "Anyone interferes with what happens here today, anyone tries to stop this, anyone so much as raises their voice, I'll burn this town to the ground. I'll hang every man who looks at me wrong. I'll take every woman and child and sell them to the nearest mine camp. You understand me? This is my town. My rules. You're alive because I allow it. Don't forget that." The silence that followed was absolute. Some of the townspeople looked at their feet. Others stared straight ahead, their faces blank. A few mothers pulled their children closer. No one made a sound. The stranger listened to it all. He didn't react. He didn't blink. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, his red bandana bright against the dust and the dirt and the decay of the street. Harlan gestured to Buck Larson. "Get the groom up to the post. Let's get this done." Buck stood up, knife still in hand, and walked toward the stranger. "You heard the chief," he said. "Time to meet your bride." The stranger didn't resist. He walked forward, his boots leaving soft impressions in the dust. The crowd parted wider to let him pass. As he approached the hitching post, Clara turned her veiled face toward him. Her breath was coming fast and shallow. She was trying not to shake. He stopped 3 feet from her. He could see her hands, the rope burns dark against her wrists. He could see the frayed hem of the wedding dress, the dust on her bare feet. And beneath the thin fabric of the veil, he could just make out the shape of her face. Harlan clapped his hands. "All right, preacher. Do your thing. Make it quick. We got gambling to get back to." The preacher stepped forward, still trembling. He opened his small prayer book, though everyone knew the words wouldn't be legal or binding or blessed by any god that was watching. He looked at the stranger. Do you take this woman to be your wife?" The stranger didn't answer right away. He was still looking at Clara. For a long moment, the whole street held its breath. Then, slowly, very slowly, he reached out and took the edge of the veil between his fingers. Harlan's men tensed. Their hands went to their guns. Something about the way the stranger moved had put them on edge. The stranger lifted the veil. The face beneath was pale and thin. The eyes were sunken from days of fear and no sleep. The lips were dry and cracked. But the stranger wasn't looking at her eyes. He was looking at her collarbone, at the small old scar just above it. He froze. His hand stopped in the air. The veil hung halfway up, forgotten. His whole body went rigid, like a man who had just walked into a wall he didn't know was there. Clara saw his face change. She saw the color drain from his skin. She saw his eyes widen. And in that moment, something passed between them. Something that had no words. He whispered a name. Just one word. So quiet that only she could hear it. She gasped. Her legs buckled. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Harlan, standing 20 feet away, noticed the hesitation. "What's the matter, groom? Cold feet?" The stranger didn't respond. He was still staring at Clara. His chest was rising and falling faster now. His jaw tightened. Then Harlan laughed again. "Maybe we misjudged you. Maybe you're not so brave after all." The gang members grinned. Jeb Maddox shifted his shotgun. Buck Larson took a step closer, but the stranger wasn't retreating. He was still as a stone. And when he finally looked away from Clara and toward Harlan, there was something new in his eyes, something cold and absolute. And that's when everything changed. The stranger stood frozen, the thin veil still clutched in his fingers. The name he'd whispered hung in the air between him and the woman. Clara's cracked lips parted again, but still no sound came. Her eyes brimmed with sudden, desperate recognition. Harlan's laughter died first. He squinted through the dust and tilted his head. "What's the matter with you, boy? You look like you seen a ghost." Jeb Maddox shifted his weight against the water trough. Buck Larson straightened up, his knife forgotten. The other gang members stopped their lazy smirking and let their hands drift toward their holsters. The stranger didn't answer Harlan. He couldn't. His mind was racing backward through 10 years of grief. The burned homestead, the riders in the night, the girl who was supposed to be dead. He'd buried an empty coffin because there had been nothing left to bury. And now here she was, thin, battered, terrified, but alive. Alive. Clara's chin trembled. She mouthed something back at him, a word no one else could hear. His own name. The nickname she'd given him when they were children. No one had called him that in a decade. His jaw set like iron. He forced down the wave of emotion and let the veil fall back over her face. The movement was slow and deliberate, as if closing a curtain on a private moment. Harlan took a step forward, his boots crunching in the dirt. "I asked you a question, groom. What did you just say to my daughter?" The stranger turned. His face was flat again, but his eyes were ice. He measured the distance between himself and each of the 7 armed men. He marked the shotgun in Maddox's hands, the revolver on Larson's hip, the rifle leaning against the saloon wall just out of reach. "Nothing you'd understand," the stranger said. The crowd stirred. It was the first time anyone had spoken to Harlan without fear in 6 months. A few townspeople edged backward, sensing what was coming. Mothers pulled their children into doorways. Harlan's grin faded completely. He pointed a thick finger at the stranger. "You're starting to annoy me, friend. Now finish the ceremony or take a bullet. Your choice." The stranger didn't move. He looked at the preacher, who was still trembling with his prayer book half open. He looked at the townspeople, who were watching with white faces. He looked at the bound hands of his sister, still dripping thin trails of blood into the dust. Then he did something no one expected. He spoke to Clara through the veil, but his voice carried across the silent street. "Don't move from this spot, no matter what happens. Do you understand?" Clara nodded. A single tear cut through the grime on her cheek. Harlan's eyes narrowed. He was quick to anger and quick to recognize defiance. He'd crushed it 100 times before. "That's it!" he growled. "Maddox, take him!" Maddox lifted his shotgun and stepped forward with a grin. "Be happy to, Chief." The stranger's hand didn't go to his pistol. He took one step sideways, placing himself between Clara and the gang. His voice was calm as still water. "You can shoot me," he said, "but you should know something first. That woman isn't your daughter. She's mine, my blood, and I'm not leaving without her." The words fell like stones into a well. Harlan blinked. His men glanced at one another. The crowd forgot to breathe. Then Harlan threw his head back and laughed. It was a hard, ugly sound. "Your blood! That's cute! You just earned yourself a grave, stranger." His hand dropped toward his gun. So did 5 others. Maddox raised the shotgun to his shoulder. Buck Larson stepped forward, knife now replaced by a revolver. The stranger stood still. He had no cover, no allies, no time, but his eyes never left Harlan. "Last chance," the stranger said quietly. "Let her go, and I'll ride out." Harlan's answer was the click of a hammer being pulled back, and then the first shot cracked through the square. The shot came from Jeb Maddox's shotgun. The blast ripped into the wooden post beside Clara. Splinters flew in every direction. She screamed and dropped to her knees, the rope still holding her upright. The stranger moved before the smoke cleared. His revolver was in his hand, without anyone seeing him draw. He fired twice, fast as a heartbeat. The first bullet took Maddox in the shoulder, spinning him sideways into the water trough. The second caught Buck Larson in the thigh. Larson crumpled with a howl. Harlan was already dropping behind the saloon steps, shouting orders. The remaining 5 gang members spread out, firing blind through the dust cloud that now choked the street. The stranger didn't stay in the open. He lunged to his left, rolled behind an overturned wagon that someone had abandoned near the general store. Bullets chewed the dirt at his heels. One nicked his boot heel. Another punched through the wagon's wooden side 3 inches from his head. For 10 seconds, the street was chaos. Townspeople scattered like startled birds. Women screamed. Children cried. The preacher dove behind the water trough, his prayer book still clutched to his chest. Clara remained at the post, her bound hands covering her head, sobbing. The stranger pressed his back against the wagon wheel and forced his breathing to slow. He counted the shots. Maddox's shotgun was out of the fight. Maddox was bleeding in the dirt, still alive, but useless. Larson was down. That left 5 gunmen plus Harlan. He had 4 bullets left in his revolver. Not enough. Not nearly enough. He ejected the spent casings and reloaded quickly, his fingers moving from muscle memory alone. Then he risked a glance around the edge of the wagon. Harlan had crawled behind a stack of barrels near the saloon porch. He was reloading a heavy-caliber revolver, his face twisted with fury. 2 of his men had taken cover behind the bank across the street. The other 3 were advancing slowly, crouched low, rifles aimed at the wagon. "I don't know who you are, stranger," Harlan bellowed, "but you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Nobody draws on my men in my town." The stranger didn't answer. He was looking at the hitching post. Clara was still there, curled into a ball. She was trying to work her hands free against the rough rope, but it was no use. Their eyes met through the dust. She mouthed a word. "Go." His jaw tightened. He couldn't go. He couldn't leave her, but he also couldn't win from here. 3 rifles were zeroing in on his position. 1 more volley and the wagon would be splinters. He made his choice in an instant. He popped up from behind the wagon and fired 3 shots in rapid succession, not aiming to hit, but to force the advancing men to drop. They did. He used those 2 seconds to sprint toward the alley between the general store and the feed shop. A rifle cracked. A bullet seared across his left ribs, a hot line of pain that stole his breath. He stumbled but kept running. Another shot splintered the doorframe beside him. Then he was in the alley, disappearing into the shadows. Behind him, Harlan's voice thundered, "He's hit! He's hit! Find him! Burn every building if you have to!" The stranger pressed a hand to his ribs. His palm came away red. The wound was shallow, but bleeding freely. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound it tight, teeth clenched against the pain. Then he leaned against the wall and listened. Boots pounded past the alley's mouth. Men shouted. Doors slammed. The whole town was in an uproar. He had maybe 5 minutes before they searched every crack. Across the street, he could still see a slice of daylight where the hitching post stood. Clara was still there, but not for long. A moment later, 2 gang members grabbed her and dragged her away. He heard Harlan's order. "Lock her in the root cellar. Anyone tries to free her, shoot them on sight, And find that stranger. I want his head on a post before sundown." The stranger watched them take her. His face was stone. His hands wanted to shake. He wouldn't let them. He had found his sister after 10 years of thinking she was dead, and he'd just had to run and leave her behind. But this wasn't over. Not even close. He slid deeper into the alley, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, the other resting on his revolver. Every step sent a pulse of fire through his ribs. Every breath tasted like dust and failure. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a plan was already forming. He knew the layout of the town now. He knew how many men Harlan had left. He knew where they were keeping Clara. And most importantly, he knew exactly what he was willing to do to get her back. He crouched behind a rain barrel at the end of the alley and waited for the search to pass. The sun was still high. The day was far from over. And at the very edge of his hearing, he caught Harlan's voice again, laughing at something one of his men said, laughing as if the stranger was just a minor inconvenience. That laugh would not last. The stranger made a silent promise. But what happened next? No one in that town would ever forget. The search party passed the alley mouth twice. Boots crunched in the dirt, then faded. The stranger pressed his back against the rain barrel and let out a slow breath. The wound in his side still bled, but the strip of shirt had slowed it. He could move. He could still fight. He waited until the street fell quiet. Not silent. There were still angry shouts near the saloon, and somewhere a woman was crying. But the gang had pushed their search toward the livery. That gave him time. He slipped out the back of the alley and moved along a row of narrow fences. Each step sent a dull ache through his ribs. He ignored it. His mind was fixed on one thing: the root cellar where they'd taken Clara. But first he needed information. He needed to know exactly what Harlan was planning. The back door of the saloon was unlocked. He eased it open and stepped into the dim storage room. Barrels of beer, stacked crates, a single oil lamp burning low. Through the wall, he could hear voices in the bar room, Harlan's men, drinking and boasting about the shootout. He crept closer. Through a crack in the boards, he saw 3 of them at a table. One was a man named Vern Cutler, a thick-necked brute with a bandaged hand. The other 2 he didn't recognize. They were passing a bottle and laughing. "Did you see his face when he lifted that veil?" Cutler said. "Like he'd seen a ghost. Chief said he knew her. Reckon he was her husband or something." "Don't matter now," the second man muttered. "Chief's got plans. That mine camp over by Durango pays good money for women. He's sending her at dawn." The stranger's jaw tightened. Dawn. That gave him just one night. He listened longer. They talked about the attack on the wagon train, how they'd burned the settlers' wagons near a dry creek, how they'd shot the men and laughed about it. Then Cutler said something that made the stranger's blood cold. "She kept saying some name, cried the whole night, something about a valley up north, little place called Oak Hollow." The stranger's hands clenched. Oak Hollow. That was home. That was the valley where he'd grown up, where his family had been murdered 10 years ago, where he'd buried an empty grave for his sister. Now he had no doubt left. He backed away from the door and melted out into the alley again. The night was coming fast. He had to see Clara. He had to let her know he was still alive and still fighting. The root cellar was behind the feed store, a half-buried door in the ground with a heavy padlock. One guard stood outside, a bored-looking kid with a rifle. The stranger circled around, came up from the back, and dropped him with the butt of his revolver. Not dead, just out. He crouched by the cellar door. There was a small grating near the top, a rusted iron vent. He put his mouth close to it. "Clara," he whispered. No answer at first. Then a rustle of fabric, a small, choked voice. "I thought you were dead." "I'm not. I'm coming back for you. Hold on until dawn. Do you hear me?" I hear you. Her voice cracked, but there was something new in it. Not just fear anymore. Hope. He pressed his hand flat against the cold wood. I'll be back, I promise. Then he was gone into the night, a shadow moving toward the edge of town. His side throbbed. His body begged for rest. But his mind was already working, planning, counting the hours until sunrise. He had one night to prepare, one night to save his sister. And when dawn came, Harlan would learn exactly what kind of man he'd crossed. The night had teeth. The stranger felt them in his side with every step. He moved through the back alleys of Fort Worth, one hand pressed against the bloody strip of shirt around his ribs. The wound wasn't deep, but it kept pulling open every time he twisted. He needed to sit down. He needed to let his blood settle. He needed someone to hide him until dawn. Ira's general store stood dark at the end of a narrow lane. The old shopkeeper had been the one who muttered about Clara's accent that first morning. The one who looked like he wanted to help but didn't dare. The stranger rapped twice on the back door, soft as a moth. The door cracked open. Ira's face appeared, pale and frightened. His hands shook on the latch. "You," the old man whispered. "They'll kill us both." "I know, I need an hour. Maybe 2. Ira hesitated. Behind him, his wife's voice quavered from somewhere in the dark. Then he pulled the door wide and let the stranger inside. They sat him down in a small room at the back of the store. Ira's wife, a thin woman named Hattie, brought water and clean rags. She cleaned the wound with trembling hands, while Ira stood by the window, watching the street. "Your sister," Ira said without turning around. "That's who she is. I heard it in her voice this morning. Same valley. Oak Hollow." The stranger didn't answer. He just stared at the wall while Hattie bound the wound properly. "She's in the root cellar back of the feed store," Ira went on. "They got 2 men on it now. Chief's real angry. He says he's sending her to the mine camp at first light. Some buyer coming from Durango." "I know," the stranger said. His voice was flat. He'd already heard it in the saloon, but hearing it confirmed made something settle in his chest like a cold stone. Ira turned from the window. "You can't take them all. There's 6 left, maybe 7 if that one you shot got bandaged up. And Harlan's got the whole town scared stiff. Nobody will lift a finger." "I don't need a town. I just need a rifle and the dark." Hattie finished the bandage and stepped back. She looked at her husband. Neither spoke. The stranger stood. The pain was duller now, pushed back into a corner of his mind. "Thank you. I'll be gone before they come looking." But it was already too late. The front door of the store splintered inward with a crash. Harlan's voice boomed through the shop. "Ira, get out here, old man!" The stranger grabbed his revolver. Ira shoved him toward the back door. "Go! Now! Through the window!" Gunfire broke out in the front room. A woman screamed. The stranger lunged for the back door, but 2 men were already there. Vern Cutler's thick frame blocked the moonlight. A shotgun barrel pressed against the doorframe. "Found him, Chief!" Cutler yelled. The stranger fired once through the doorway. Cutler jerked back with a curse. Then the stranger was out, running, his boots slamming the hard dirt as shots chased him into the darkness. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He found shelter in the livery, high in the hayloft, buried under dry straw. His heart hammered so loud he was sure the whole town could hear it. He listened for footsteps. None came. They'd stopped chasing. Then, in the distance, he heard the shouting change. A crowd was gathering. There was laughter, Harlan's laugh, and another sound, soft and awful. The creak of rope pulled tight. He crawled to the loft window and looked out. They'd hung Ira from the old cottonwood tree at the end of Main Street. The old shopkeeper's body swung gently in the moonlight. Hattie knelt in the dirt beneath, sobbing, and no one in town went near her. The stranger watched it happen. He watched every second. His face was stone, but his hand was white around the revolver's grip. He had brought this, his presence, his interference. The cost had been paid by a man who only wanted to help. He stayed in the loft until the crowd dispersed, until the only sounds were the wind and Hattie's quiet crying. Then he climbed down and walked to the edge of town. He found his horse still tied where he'd left it. His lever-action rifle was still in the scabbard. He pulled it free and worked the action. The metal was cold and clean in his hands. The sky was just starting to show gray at the horizon. Dawn was not far. He checked the rifle, then his revolver. Each bullet was a promise. He turned back toward the heart of Fort Worth, moving like a shadow. And from the far end of the street he began to come. The gray light of dawn crept over Fort Worth like a sickness. The stranger moved through it without sound. His wound had stiffened during the night, pulling tight every time he drew breath. But his hands were steady on the lever-action rifle. He had left his horse at the livery. He would not need it yet. He came from the south end of Main Street, staying close to the buildings. The air smelled of dust and old smoke. His boots made soft impressions in the dirt. No one saw him. No one heard him. The town was still asleep, or pretending to be. The first guard stood at the corner of the feed store, leaning against a post with a rifle across his lap. Half asleep. The stranger stepped out of the shadows behind him. One quick motion with the rifle stock, and the man crumpled without a sound. The stranger caught him before he hit the ground and laid him flat against the wall. He kept moving. The second guard was at the root cellar door. A different man from the one the stranger had knocked out hours ago. This one was older, heavier, with a shotgun resting beside him. He was not asleep. He was staring at the cellar door as if it might bite him. The stranger did not hit him. He simply appeared out of the darkness, the barrel of his rifle leveled at the man's chest. The guard saw him and froze. "Quiet," the stranger said. "Drop the shotgun." The guard's mouth opened. His eyes went wide. He dropped the shotgun into the dirt. "Walk away," the stranger said. "Now, and don't stop until you're out of this town." The guard blinked. Then he turned and ran, his boots pounding away into the gray morning. The stranger knelt beside the cellar door. "Through the vent," he whispered again. "Clara, I'm here. Don't make a sound." From below he heard a small, choked breath. She was awake. She was listening. He stood and turned his face toward the saloon. The lamps were still burning inside. Harlan would be there. Harlan always was. He walked straight down the middle of Main Street. The rifle hung at his side, but his finger was on the trigger. The first true light of day was breaking over the rooftops, turning the dust gold. He could see the old cottonwood tree at the end of the street. He could see Ira's body still hanging there. He did not look away. By the time he reached the saloon, a few faces had appeared in windows. Curtains parted. Doors creaked open an inch. The whole town was waking to the sight of a single man walking toward certain death. He stopped in the center of the street, 20 yards from the saloon doors. "Curtis Harlan!" he called out. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It cut through the morning like a blade. "Come out! Now!" Silence. Then the sound of boots inside. The saloon doors swung open, and Harlan stepped into the light. He had not slept. His eyes were red and his shirt was untucked. He held a pistol in one hand, and his other hand was clenched into a fist. Behind him, 3 of his men spilled out onto the porch. Vern Cutler with a bandaged arm, Buck Larson limping, and a third man the stranger did not recognize. Harlan squinted into the dawn. When he saw the stranger standing alone with a rifle, he let out a short, ugly laugh. "You again," he said. "I thought you'd be halfway to Mexico by now. What's the matter, groom? Still want your bride?" The stranger did not blink. "I want you to let her go. That's all. You let her go right now, and I'll ride out. You'll never see me again." Harlan's grin widened. He stepped down from the porch, his men fanning out behind him. "Let her go. She's worth money, stranger. The buyer from Durango is already on his way. Besides, I don't take orders from dead men." "You're not listening," the stranger said. "This is your last chance. Open the cellar. Let her walk free. I'll leave. You can keep the town. You can keep your money. You can keep breathing." The words hung in the air. The men on the porch shifted. Cutler glanced at Harlan with uncertainty. Larson's limp led him a step back. Harlan stared at the stranger for a long moment. His eyes were hard and calculating. He was trying to read the man in front of him. He saw the red bandana, the gray vest, the rifle held with the ease of someone who had used it more times than he could count. He saw the bloodstain on the stranger's shirt and the cold, absolute stillness in his eyes. And for just a moment, doubt flickered across Harlan's face. Then he crushed it. He had built his reputation on never backing down. He had ruled this town for 6 months with fear and bullets. He was not about to let one wounded stranger take it all away. "You talk too much," Harlan said. His hand twitched toward his pistol. The stranger did not wait. The rifle came up faster than any man on that street could track. One shot cracked through the morning. One single sound. The bullet struck Harlan in the center of his chest. He looked down at the wound as if he could not believe it. His pistol fell from his hand and thudded into the dirt. Then his knees buckled, and he pitched forward onto his face. No one moved. The 3 men on the porch stood frozen. The few townspeople watching from windows held their breath. The echo of the shot rolled down Main Street and faded into nothing. The stranger lowered the rifle. He did not look at the men on the porch. He did not need to. They were already backing away, their hands raised, their weapons forgotten. He walked past them without a word. He walked past the saloon. He walked to the root cellar behind the feed store, where a rusty lock still held the door shut. He raised the stock of his rifle and broke the lock with one blow. Then he pulled the door open, and light flooded down into the dark. Clara was there, huddled in the corner with her bound hands shielding her eyes. She looked up at him with a face full of terror and hope. The white dress was torn and filthy. Her wrists were raw, but she was alive. He knelt down and reached out his hand. "It's over," he said. "It's all over now." Clara stared at his extended hand. For a long breath, she did not move. The light from the open cellar door fell across her face, and he saw the years in her eyes, the years of fear, of being dragged from place to place, of believing everyone she loved was dead. Then her cracked lips parted, and she reached up and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and shaking. He pulled her gently to her feet, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled. The torn white dress hung from her shoulders like a shroud. Dirt and dried blood marked her bare arms. She looked at him as if he might disappear if she blinked. "You're real," she whispered. I thought I dreamed you." He didn't answer with words. He took his knife from his belt and cut the rope from her wrists. The cord fell into the dirt, and she gasped as the blood rushed back into her hands. He pulled the red bandana from around his own neck and wrapped it around her raw wrists, one at a time, slow and careful. The sun was climbing now. The street behind them was still silent, but the silence was different. It was the silence of something ending. He helped her climb out of the cellar and into the morning light. She squinted and shielded her eyes, her whole body trembling. He pressed a canteen into her hands, the same one from his saddle, and she drank like someone who had forgotten what water tasted like. Out on Main Street, the 3 men who had stood beside Harlan were gone. They had vanished the moment their leader hit the dirt, melting into the alleys the same way they had arrived 6 months ago. Cutler, the one with the bandaged arm, had dropped his gun and run. Larson had followed, limping hard. The third man had not even looked back. The gang was finished. No one would rally around a dead chief. The townspeople were beginning to drift out from their doorways. At first just a few, then more. They gathered in small clusters, staring at the body in the street, then at the man and woman standing by the feed store. No one spoke. No one cheered. This was not a celebration. It was just an ending. The stranger walked Clara toward the cottonwood tree at the end of the road. She stopped when she saw Ira's body still hanging there. Her breath caught. The stranger did not stop. He reached up and cut the rope. He lowered the old shopkeeper as gently as he could. Hattie came forward, her face wet and broken, and knelt beside her husband. 2 other women joined her, wrapping their arms around her shoulders. The stranger didn't linger. He turned and walked Clara to the hitching post where she had been bound the day before. His horse was still there, waiting. "Can you ride?" he asked her. "I don't have a horse." "You do now." He nodded toward the livery. "Take my horse, ride north. There's a town called Denton 2 days from here. Good people. Tell them what happened. They'll help you." She looked at him, her mouth opening. "You're not coming with me?" He shook his head once. "I can't. Not yet. There's still things I have to do, but I'll find you. When it's time." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her face. But 10 years had taught her how to let go. She nodded, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. He helped her into the saddle. He put the canteen back in her hands. He slipped his rifle into the scabbard, then stepped back. The whole town was watching now. They lined the boardwalks, faces drawn and quiet. The preacher who had almost performed the mock ceremony stood with his hat in his hands. The old women who had hidden behind curtains now stood in the open. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. The stranger looked at them. He did not speak. He did not offer his name. He just turned and began walking toward the south end of town. Clara sat on the dark brown horse, her hands wrapped in the red bandana, and watched him go. He walked past the saloon, past the land office, past the place where the wagon train had been attacked. He did not look back. At the edge of town, a riderless horse stood tied to a post. A horse he knew, a chestnut mare left behind by one of Harlan's men. He untied the reins, swung up into the saddle, and rode out. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the open prairie. No one in Fort Worth ever learned his name. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.